the PowerPoint, right? Okay, so thank you very much to the National Academies and the organizers for inviting me to talk at this conference. I think so far, I think we've learned a lot. What I want to talk about today is, the effects of high-skill immigration on productivity and labor markets, and focusing particularly on the case of Israel, which, as you will see, will be quite interesting. And what I'm going to present is going to be sort of a synthesis of some of the research done by myself and others on the matter. Okay, so, sorry, actually this is not the right, I think you put up the PDF file. No, not the PDF, the PowerPoint. Could you put up the PowerPoint? Sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Israel, also known as the startup nation, and this is based on a popular, best-selling book by Sinor and Singer in 2009. So these are a couple of graphs that I took from that book. They show venture capital investments per capita, and they compare Israel to the United States and a bunch of other countries, and Israel is completely off the map. If you look at sort of non-US companies on NASDAQ, Israel, population of about 7.5 million people, is the country with, at least as of 2009, the highest number of companies on NASDAQ. I actually just checked the numbers. China has now overtaken Israel, so that is no longer relevant, but still, 7 million versus 1.2 billion people, it's a little bit of a difference. Okay, so the Startup Nation, this 2009 New York Times bestseller, the book is devoted to highlighting the remarkable success of Israel's high-tech industry and the startup sector. And as I said, Israel has sort of more startups and a larger venture capital industry per capita than any other country in the world. And the authors explicitly mention immigration as sort of one of the two major factors that contribute most to Israel's economic growth. Okay, so this is a direct quote from the book. Immigrants are not averse to starting from scratch. They are by definition risk takers, and a nation of immigrants is a nation of entrepreneurs. And so that's sort of my highlight. And immigrants have great incentive to try their luck, to take risks, because immigrants have nothing to lose. Okay, so this is the story about immigration to Israel. Why are they talking about immigration to Israel? Well, Israel is a country that, both in absolute levels, has experienced, very large numbers, very large waves of immigration. So there was like this very large wave just, the late 1940s, just with the creation of the wave, with the creation of the state. Then there were some periodic peaks in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And then we have this, mass migration wave from the former USSR. Okay, so 1989, Berlin Wall collapses, a lot of uncertainty in Russia and, the former Soviet countries about, what will happen. And, Israel, at least in the first couple of years, 1990, 1991, they take in about 200,000 immigrants per year. And that goes on throughout the 90s. It's not quite at the same level as the first 2 years, but still number about 60 to 70,000 immigrants per year throughout the 1990s. Okay, and as a share of the total population, this is really massive. Okay, so I think that we're talking about 1990, 91. We're talking about 3.5 to 4.5% of the existing sort of stock of population at the time. That's sort of the size of the migration wave. So that's something that is really sort of unprecedented. I think the only comparable episode in world history is the mass migration to the United States at the turn of the 20th century. Okay, so there's something very unique about this 1990s migration wave. Not only in terms of size, that population increased sort of within a decade by about 20%, but also in terms of quality. Okay, so the graph here just shows the educational attainment by immigrant status. So this is based on data from the Israeli labor force surveys by I think throughout the 1990s, and we see that whereas at the time about 12% of Israeli natives were by natives, I should say everybody who was living in Israel before 1990. So a lot of these people are actually sort of, born abroad because Israel is itself sort of a country of immigrants. Okay, so we're comparing the natives to post-1990 immigrants, and whereas about 12-13% of natives had a college degree, that proportion among immigrants was more than 30%. Okay, so this was an overwhelmingly highly skilled group of migrants. Okay, and since 1990, Israel's GDP has grown on an average about 4.6% per year, which is quite a bit faster than other developed countries. So the U.S., for comparison, has grown at an annual rate of about 2%. And so it's natural to ask, what is the role of immigration in this, economic miracle? So that was sort of my introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit, because this is a conference about immigration policy, about specific policies regarding immigration to Israel, and then focus sort of more specifically on this 1990s migration episode, and ask three sets of questions. First, how immigrants were absorbed in the Israeli economy. Very briefly talk about effects on the labor market, and then the bulk of the talk will be on the effects of immigrants on productivity in one specific sector, which is manufacturing. But I'm going to show you that it's a reasonable place to look at. Okay, so something about immigration policy in Israel. So we talked about a lot of countries that want to sort of limit immigration, or have quotas, or are thinking whether to increase it by a little bit. And Israel, from this point of view, is different from everywhere else because it really has a almost completely open immigration policy. Okay, so almost completely, meaning that conditional on being Jewish, it's completely open. Okay, so this comes from Israel's Declaration of Independence. The Jewish state will be open for Jewish immigration. Okay, so that's sort of stated specifically in the the state sort of founding charter. And I should say here that the definition of Jewishness, according to the Ministry of Immigration, so Israel has a Ministry of Immigration, is actually much more liberal and inclusive than say the definition of Jewishness according to the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Okay, so if you have sort of one grandfather who was one grandparent who was Jewish, you're probably going to be eligible to migrate to Israel under the law of return. Okay, so the law of return states that any Jew who wishes to settle in Israel has the right to do so and gains citizenship immediately. Okay, so my personal anecdote is that when I, after actually having lived in Israel for a while, finally decided that I might need to get sort of citizenship. So there's no fanfare, there's no big ceremony with flags and things. Like you sit in line at the government office, and then some employee, sort of government employee, stamps your thing and say, okay, you're gone. Doesn't even say Mazal Tov or anything. So it was a little bit anticlimactic. But what's important is that immigrants receive a generous package of subsidies, and it's called the Absorption Basket. Okay, so this includes a cash allowance for 6 months. Okay, about totals to about $13,000 for a family of 4, spread out over 6 months. So this is literally a check that you receive from the government just to facilitate absorption. There are subsidies for rent. There are subsidies for mortgage payments if you decide to buy a house. There's a free intensive Hebrew course in Ulpan. So it's like 5 weeks, 5 hours a day, full immersion Hebrew course where you learn the language. There are benefits for appliances, benefits for buying a car. There are very high customs for buying these goods for Israelis, and immigrants are exempt from those customs. There are income tax breaks. There are exemption for municipal taxes. There are university tuition breaks. So there's a whole pretty generous package of benefits that are designed to encourage immigration, because as you probably know, Israel from other points of view is not maybe the most attractive country in the world. Okay, so since it's about high skill immigration, I want to talk a little bit about sort of some additional benefits for high skilled people. There are sort of benefits for entrepreneurs. To me, they strike me as pretty insignificant. So you get free business and tax advice. Some consultant from the Ministry of Immigration will help you draft a business plan, and you get sort of some help with financing your loans at preferential terms. So that's something. And there are also some specific benefits for scientists. Mostly they include counseling and guidance and identifying job openings. So there's a program of the Ministry of Absorption together with the manufacturing association where they can sort of try to match immigrants to job openings. Plus, employers receive subsidies up to $46,000 for PhD scientists spread out over 3 years if you hire immigrant workers. Okay, and what's also interesting is that many of the same benefits also apply to returning citizens. Okay, so not just to people who had never lived in Israel, but to Israelis who left and want to come back. So many of these benefits also are designed to encourage return migration, and for scientists, Israeli scientists that return to Israel are also eligible to these Marie Curie grants that will apply in other countries in the European Union. Okay, so many of these policies were already in place in the 1990s. I'm not really sure. I think that at the margin they may have sort of encouraged a little bit of migration, but the main driving force of migration was what was going on in the Soviet Union and also what was going on in Israel. So the first wave, the main factor driving migration was uncertainty about security and economic prospects in the collapsing USSR. If you ask immigrants, probably their first preferred destination would have been to come to the US or Germany or elsewhere. But Israel was really the only country that was had an open door and was willing to accept them right away. And this sort of interesting result that as the 1990s progressed, immigrants became somewhat less skilled. So the way that things worked, that the Jewish agency sort of had set up institutions mostly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and where most of the highly skilled, the doctors, the engineers were. And as those sort of localities emptied out, then they went out sort of further out where the immigrants are somewhat less skilled. And after 2000, security situation in Israel deteriorates. Second Intifada, Russia starts to look a little bit better, and pretty much migration comes to a halt. Okay, so I think it's sort of interesting to look at these policies, but probably we shouldn't exaggerate what the role that these policies have in attracting immigration. Okay, so let's talk a little about immigrants in the Israeli labor market. And again, I'm going to focus on this sort of post-1990s migration. There was this massive influx of high-skilled workers, and sort of probably not very surprisingly, initially they struggled to find employment that was commensurate to their skills. Okay, so this is a table that I've taken from a paper by Yoram Weiss and co-authors, where they had a survey of immigrants, which oversampled engineers, Soviet immigrants that oversampled engineers. Okay, so they basically classified the population into 3 groups. Occupation 1 is the engineers and scientists. Occupation 2 is clerical workers, and occupation 3 are sort of blue collar workers. And what you see is that the occupation in the former USSR, about 84% of this sample was employed in occupation 1. But even 5 years after migration, only 36% were employed in these high-skill occupations. Okay, so there is a process. It goes up from 11% to 36%, but it's sort of far from complete. Okay, so it's certainly not the case that that all immigrants were sort of successfully able to find jobs in their in their profession. Okay, and this is sort of a slightly different way of presenting the same data. So this is just from the aggregate from the labor force surveys. And here I'm comparing the occupational distribution of immigrants to natives with a college degree. Okay, so I'm cheating a little bit because I'm comparing sort of all immigrants to natives with a college degree. But you see the occupational distribution is entirely different. And actually, there hasn't been that much of a change between 92, 93 and 98, 99. Okay, so natives with a college degree, overwhelmingly they're scientists or other white-collar occupations. Immigrants, overwhelmingly they're in blue-collar occupations. Okay, so this is the Israeli case. Okay, so Herbert gave some very good summary about labor market effects in Germany, the UK, and Denmark. There's also been some study on labor market effects of immigration in Israel. I think the general finding is that there was like a negative correlation between native wages and the concentration of immigrants in occupations. Okay, so occupations that had high share of immigrants experience sort of lower wage growth. This effect sort of dissipates in the medium to long run, so after 5 to 10 years. And there's some debate between Rachel Friedberg and ourselves about whether we should interpret this as a causal effect or not. But there does seem to be, at least at the correlational level, there does seem to be this negative correlation that native wages were sort of impacted negatively by immigration. Okay. Okay. So what about productivity? And we've talked a lot about productivity, and Bill will talk more about it. So simple question that I ask is, do industries and firms with a higher concentration of immigrants, did they experience productivity gains? Okay, and I'm going to focus on the manufacturing sector. The main reason was because of data availability. So we have detailed data at the firm level with information on the number of immigrants. So there was a special survey that asked firms, how many immigrants do you employ? But also it makes sense to focus on manufacturing, because I'm going to show you in a second that immigrants were disproportionately employed in the manufacturing sector. And Israeli growth in the 1990s was driven mostly by the manufacturing sector. Okay, so the main shortcoming is that this does not include the ICT sector. So a lot of the startup nation phenomena is in sort of high tech and software and other ICT industries that are not included in this classification. Okay, so that we should keep that in mind. Okay, so this is just showing what happened to the manufacturing output or output per worker for the whole private sector. That's the blue line, and manufacturing in the 1990s. Okay, so there's definitely sort of this trend break in the 1990s, something sort of different happening around sort of 1993. Okay, and the fast growth is driven mainly by medium high-tech and high-tech industries, okay, whereas the low-tech and medium low-tech industries, nothing much seems to be happening, okay? So the trajectory here is flat, and a lot of the growth is in the high-tech industries, okay? And this table just sort of summarizes the previous graphs. So output per worker in manufacturing, while it tracked the total private sector pretty well in the 70s and 80s, it really sort of takes off in the 1990s. And whether you measure it just simply output per worker or measure total factor productivity, you get very similar story. Okay. Of course, this doesn't prove anything about the effect of immigration, because elsewhere, if you look elsewhere, it's also true that manufacturing was growing pretty rapidly in the 1990s. So, for example, in the U.S., manufacturing growth was about 4.7% in the 1990s versus 2.8% in the 1980s. Okay, so this is, as I was saying, the fact that immigrants are disproportionately employed in manufacturing. So among males, only about 25% of workers are employed in mining and manufacturing. Among immigrants, that number is 21%. And it's also true among females that you have 25 versus 11%. Okay, so manufacturing was a sector that sort of disproportionately employed immigrants. Okay, and in which industries sort of within manufacturing were immigrants concentrated? So this is the distribution in 1993. I don't know if you can read the bars, but the industries are sorted by the immigrant concentration, and the blue bars are high-tech industries, and the gold bars are low and medium tech industries. So you actually see that they're pretty much spread out all over the map. Okay, so it's not clear that that immigrants were sort of more highly concentrated in the high-tech industries as opposed to the low-tech industries. This is in 1993. In 1997, there's been a little bit of a shift of immigrants towards the high-tech industries, and especially that sort of electronic components industries really sort of takes off in 1997. Okay, so so there does seem to be sort of some evidence that immigrants are moving towards sort of more high-tech sector. Okay, so what were immigrants doing within manufacturing? And the story is sort of similar to what you had seen before, is that initially they were not necessarily employed using all their skills. So if you look at the columns for 1993, 13% of the total workforce of the total workforce were immigrants, but only 7.4% of scientists were immigrants. Okay, and if you look at the occupational distribution, 93% of immigrants in 1993 were essentially working as production workers. Okay, and in 1997, that gap has pretty much closed. Okay, so still, the vast majority of immigrants are working in production, sort of not as scientists. Now it's 81%, but now the share of immigrants working as scientists within manufacturing mirrors more closely their proportion overall. Okay, so the final question, is immigrant concentration correlated with productivity at the firm level? So this would be sort of the aha moment. Now I'm going to prove you that there is this relationship, and the answer is no. Okay, so the paper does a lot more analysis and all sorts of different robustness checks. But the bottom line is that if you regress output per worker or total factor productivity or sort of other measures of productivity on the share of immigrants in an industry, you typically find sort of zero effects. Okay, either zero effects, so either at the firm level or at the industry level. You do try to do sort of some adjustment for the potential endogenous sorting of immigrants across industries. You find pretty much zip. Okay, and if anything, when stars appear in this graph, they usually come in with a negative sign. Okay, so some evidence of heterogeneous effects, that the negative effect is mostly driven by the presence of immigrants in low-tech industries. There could be sort of some positive coefficients popping up in the medium and high-tech industries, but nothing is really terribly robust. Okay, so I'm over time, so let me have just a brief discussion. So my conclusion would be that despite the suggestive macro trends, I didn't find any evidence of a positive correlation between the immigrant share and productivity at the micro level. And possible explanations is that these high-skilled immigrants were really sort of employed in low-skilled jobs, and there's no reason that we should expect that to lead to higher productivity. Okay, the other sort of possible explanations that there are cultural and language barriers that prevent assimilation. And a more benign interpretation is that there's sort of efficient sorting of workers across industries, that immigrants are sorting in these maybe low productivity firms, but they're freeing up the native Israeli workers to work in the more productive firms and industries. That is a potential explanation, even though there isn't any sort of direct evidence in support of it. Okay, so finally, what are the lessons for other countries? One thing that sort of makes the Israeli episode, in a sense, fascinating is that's unique. The fact that it's unique maybe means that we can't really learn anything about it for other countries, because I don't think if this episode is repeatable in Israel. I don't know if it's repeatable in other contexts. So this was supply-driven migration. The immigrants fled the USSR in haste. They had little knowledge of the chances to integrate. It's not people who had to make a necessarily well thought out plan of what they would do in Israel. And maybe the outcome was sort of less positive than one could have thought. But I would conclude saying that some lessons may be more general. There are cultural, language, and professional barriers. Not all human capital is transferable. Okay, and this is true not only in Israel but in elsewhere. And I would say the romantic view that immigrants are always more driven, more ambitious, more successful. I think we've learned in the last 25, 30 years that that's not necessarily the case. There is immigrant selectivity, and not necessarily when you let in more immigrants, you're going to have necessarily the best and brightest. Thank you very much.